Hello everyone, this is Terry Crow, the president of Starfish Performance Consultants and creator of Progress to Success Management. Welcome to our third and final video as we explore and learn about the domain of Manage Conversation. Welcome back. Let's get right into it. As you might recall, in the the prior training video, we talked about the foundational concept in the domain of Manage Conversation, and that foundational concept is called Interact with Impact. We also talked about how that domain or that foundational concept can best be described through a secret three-part formula. And that formula that we talked about in the training video was status plus story plus structure. We covered the first element of that formula in the other training video, which was status. So we talked about how status is a state or condition, and here are the elements that we talked about that describe that part of the formula. So now we have two more pieces of the formula for Interact with Impact, and we're getting ready to cover them right now. Okay, the second part of the formula has to do with story. You might remember when we were talking about the brain, that one of the things that our brain just loves to do is to tell stories, to create narratives, to put us, the lead and central player in the drama known as our lives. And our brain loves to put ourselves into, or put us into stories. These stories can be of any variety from A to Z, up, down, inside out. But our brains are constantly creating these stories, which are nothing more than accounts of events, the events in our lives. Stories play an integral part in our interactions with others in many ways. They play a great part in terms of making our interactions of impact or not. The stories that we tell each other really are so telling in terms of where we are in our lives, where others are in terms of what their perspectives are. They are extraordinarily revealing if we learn how to pay attention and to listen to the stories, to diagnose and to start getting some sort of sense of what's going on. What's going on? So when we talk about stories, what do stories mean? Our stories can change. Stories, one of the descriptive elements of stories is that they change. The stories that we are telling ourselves, the stories that others are spinning, they change. They can change from minute to minute, from day to day, from week to week. They do change. The other, what's important is as far as this goes, is that because stories can change because of new information, or they can change for no other reason except that our perspective changes. I can think of times, and I'm sure you can too, where I have gone through my work day, had interactions with people. Some went well, some went okay, some I need to work on. And maybe I'll go to sleep and there was a particular interaction that I just felt pretty decent about. And then the next morning, and I'm not a moody person at all, I'm really stable, but for some reason I wake up and this interaction that I felt okay about the night before, for some reason my story has changed. for some reason something has happened where I see it differently and in a different light and not so great of a light. That's the thing about stories. So stories change. The point is that because stories change, and not necessarily because of additional information and facts, it's really important not to stick to one story that you have about a situation in an interaction and let that just be let that be it. Stories evolve, they're fluid. It's really important to make sure that we understand that we're creating our own stories, our own reality along the way. And that any point in time, we can choose to change that perspective, that locus of focus, to change our reality and to tweak and modify our stories so that we can become much more effective in our interactions. So for example, if in our stories we're playing a victim or a martyr or an overly assertive aggressor, things that are parts in stories that are not beneficial for building up great interactions, we need to maybe relook at our story and look at what the role is that we're playing and what we're telling ourselves, and pay attention to what others might be telling in their stories as well. So stories are very important in interaction. What's helpful is to keep in mind that at any given point in time during interactions, there are 3 different stories at work. At least 3 that I can think of, and maybe you'll think of more. But there are at least 3 stories going on. Of course, there's our story. What I just described earlier is that our stories change. They're based on what our thoughts and feelings and being is as it relates to the situation at hand, and it operates in sort of a dance together. So there's our story. Obviously, there's their story. So not only are we spinning our stories, others are as well. There's also the potential, keep in mind here, this is a really important concept, there's the potential of there being a shared story. For an interaction to have impact, as I describe it, one that's effective, there has to be, at some point in time, a movement to creating a shared story. So that the interaction is not just all about me, or it's not just all about your story, but we look to discover, to reveal, to build up that shared story. And only when we're able to do that are we able to truly interact with impact. So consider this in your interactions and as you are having meetings and conversations with others. What is it about the story, the common story, that you can discover? And as you begin to be aware of this, you'll be amazed at how you become more skilled at finding that common story or looking for the common story. So our story, their story, and the shared story. 3 stories. Now, looking for a shared story is what we need to do to have actions with impact. When we are able to find that story that is compelling, the shared story that's compelling, this is when we begin to be able to move mountains in our interactions. A compelling story, one that matters, one that makes a difference. It's compelling, it's inspiring, it moves us to action. Finding a compelling story is really important to interact with impact. So how do we do that? What does that mean? Well, compelling stories have certain elements about them. The first is that compelling stories are ones that we care about. You know, the compelling story that drives the interaction is one that we mutually care about. So as we're working, let's say you're working on a project with someone and you are looking to introduce a new product in your organization. This new product is one that will serve clients in a new way. So you and your team are together trying to start putting some structure to this new product and come up with what the product is. An important part of interacting with impact is finding ways to get to that shared story so that you as a group, you as an individual, are putting together something, a type of product around something that you care about. Something that you care about. Maybe this product will be able to help out your clients in a new way that will really enhance their lives. And it's in a way that you care about, that your team cares about, that individuals care about in their interactions. This is an example of a shared story that people care about. So to contrast that, interactions that we are in where we are forcing our agenda or our need to be right in the interaction on matters that we care about, but that that others don't care about, you won't have a compelling story. So it has to be something that people care about. A compelling story also is one that speaks to this level of contribution, this issue of contribution. We are more able to create compelling stories when we are operating and working towards something that is tapping into our ability to create and contribute at the highest levels possible. So here what we're talking about is getting at this notion of excellence. How do you create excellence and value that is the highest it can possibly be? Progress to Success Management is about creating and producing remarkable results. They are results that are possible because we are working on a shared story that we care about and that contributes at the greatest and highest level. So unless we are constantly striving for excellence and high levels of contribution, we'll fall short of getting remarkable results. The third area that contributes to a compelling story is one where people involved are willing to commit to the story. So if it's a story that I care about and that is one that serves what I think is important, but it isn't something that you feel like is important, then we may leave the interaction and I might think everything went well and we are committed to taking action and getting things done. I might have 100% full commitment, but you might have only 10 or 20% commitment. Not that that means you won't do your part and get things done, but it isn't something that maybe you're fully behind and invested and committed to doing. I see this happen all the time, where managers are moving forward on things and in meetings and on one-on-one with people, and they leave the interaction and they are on board and moving forward and charging ahead, and guess what? They're looking behind them and nobody's following them. Or they're following them but at a very slow pace and not really all that inspired. Commitment is about having a shared story where you are willing and people in the interaction are willing and invested in it. They're committed. They are committed to working to make this story happen. the shared story. So we have 3 stories. We want to make sure our stories are compelling. This leads us to the practice in this particular part of the formula. And you might be able to guess sort of what it is, but I'll write it down anyway. Okay. Seek the compelling story. That might not be much of a surprise, but let me just say a few words on this. When we're talking about this practice, this seek the compelling story, we've talked about story, we've talked about compelling. We want to be in a mindset of seeking. The practice part involves not only knowing what we mean when we talk about a compelling story and a story and what all goes into that. The practice part says that we are always going to be seeking the compelling story. Not just any story, but the compelling one. And our brains are engaged in actively seeking. We're constantly seeking, we're constantly looking, we're constantly trying to discover and unearth and get that compelling story out in the open and make it one that's shared. That's the practice that's associated that describes seeking the compelling story. I, of course, will go into this in more detail on our coaching call, but that's the practice that goes along with the formula part number 2 related to story. All right, we have one more to go, and then we're finished with the training videos for this week. The third and final element in the formula of Interact with Impact is about structure. It's about structure. We want to be able to approach our interactions not in a rigid way, not in a way that says you have to do this, this, but that it does have some structure and design to it. When I think about interactions, in this part, we talk about structure, but interactions are also a good way to describe it is that they're kind of like a dance. And the dance might be the foxtrot or the tango, or it might be a waltz. But there are certain feels to our interactions. There are certain rhythms. There's a certain flow. There's a certain symphony that goes along with the particular dance of the interaction. And obviously the dancers are the participants that are in that interaction. And the dance that is ultimately performed can be artistic, and we are able to dance our best dance in an artistic way of expression as we're following the steps which relate to the structure. So we don't just dance the dance in any old way. Well, I've done that before and it's not a pretty sight, but but the idea is that the structure part of our interactions is not meant to be rigid or anything like that, but it is that part of the dance that is designed to give us a pattern and give us some steps to follow. So the structure as it relates to Interact with Impact is looking at our areas of focus during interactions. There are 3 areas that we really want to be focusing on during any of our interactions. The first of the areas has to do with actively participate. Well, what does that mean? When we are in interactions, we've talked about in the Manage Yourself domain how important it is to practice presence, how important it is to be there, be here. When we are in interactions, when we are actively participating, we are engaged, we are present, we are with the persons who are the parties, who are our dance partners. Can you imagine dancing with someone when you're not actively engaged? Not that would be tough to do, right? So we're talking about actively participating. So actively listening, actively speaking, responding, behaving in a way that is building up and contributing to the conversation. So when we're talking about listening, for example, we're talking about really seeking to understand and to comprehend, what is being said? What's the message? What's the message that's going on here? I've heard it said before, these wisdom words that we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth. So we should be listening twice as long as we are speaking. Listening is a critical part of interacting with impact. Are we listening? Are we trying to determine message and seeking to understand, relate, and connect? How are we responding? How are we speaking? Our speaking, what words are we choosing? Are we being really careful and thoughtful with the words that we choose, with the way that we express ourselves that's authentic, but that again helps to cultivate connection, that helps to create dialogue and exchange, that allows us to create that shared story that has meaning. So listening, speaking, responding, not reacting, but responding. How do we do this in a way where we can say that we are actively engaged and present in the interaction? The second part of this structure, ACT, is to, this is so helpful, this next one. Activate the observer. We've talked before about how one of the endowments that we have as humans is our ability to be self-aware, which is, number one, that we recognize ourselves as separate individuals, and we have the capacity to step back and to be the observer and to actually look at what's going on. So during interactions, and I practice this all the time, at any given point in time, we can imaginatively step out of the conversation and observe what's going on. What's going on in this conversation? It allows us to be able to recheck and to get our perspective and to become even more engaged at a deeper level in what's going on. So we may, as we have activated the observer, we are going to be monitoring and interpreting and assigning meaning to what's going on as we are paying attention to how we're reacting in the interaction. For example, I remember an interaction a while back where it was in a group meeting, and the person that I was in the meeting with, I was getting body language from her that was saying that what I was describing, that it didn't make any sense to her, or she didn't understand it, or see how I was interpreting it. But as I was able to step out of the conversation and observe how I was experiencing it and trying to understand what was going on, I discovered that her body language had nothing to do with my message and her comprehending. And I was able to do that by asking her some clarifying questions to find out if she was getting the message, if it made sense to her, if she had anything to add to it. But without stepping back as the observer, sometimes we can just get all tangled up in emotions and feelings that get us nowhere. So observing ourselves, observing others. I've just mentioned before, body language, what people are saying, stepping back and seeing if people seem to be okay with what's going on, or if they seem to be tense. What are they saying in terms of what's happening with the interaction? And then finally, just monitoring the environment. Step back and say, this environment, am I feeling uncomfortable and clammy because it's really hot? Are we getting circulation of air? Is the environment conducive? Is the environment not just the physical environment, but is the culture? Is the are the emotions that are being expressed? Are the weather conditions within the interaction okay? So that's what I mean by environment as well. Activate the observer. This is something that as you practice it, you get better at it, and it is extraordinarily helpful in interactions. I can't think of interactions that I go into of any length of time where I don't, at some point in time, and usually multiple points in times, step back and play that part of the observer. Very helpful. The last part is about acting. So you actively participate, you activate the observer, and you act on information. So our interactions are moving towards something. They are moving toward us acting, taking actions that are very specific and that move us forward. Remember, we're about progress. We're about getting results. We're about going somewhere. So in every interaction that has to do with work and that has to do with getting things done, we need to be leaving them with clear direction of what's going to happen, what actions are going to be taken that are going to move us forward and take us forward with progress. Every interaction that's related to work and getting things done, this is very key. We do this as we focus on these two areas. And I've mentioned these before in some prior scenarios that we talked about. Progress as it relates to our goals. Are we achieving the results that we have said we have set out to achieve in our goals? Are we achieving our results as we grow as well? Are we getting somewhere? Are we cultivating relationships? Are we growing our relationships? Are we growing ourselves? These are all areas of emphasis, very important in the domain of, or in the foundational concept of interact with impact. So, our structure includes these three areas: actively participate, activate the observer, act on information. And the last thing we need to do is to include our practice, which says apply structure to interactions for habit. So we want to make sure that we're applying the structure, that we are practicing it, so that ultimately it becomes a habit. We're going to talk about that more on our coaching call and how we actually will do that. How we apply structure to interactions for habit. So this concludes our training video, the training videos for this domain. I encourage you to be on the lookout in your email inbox for one more communication from me that will include your coaching call and your training materials. At the conclusion of that, you'll be finished with the second domain, which is manage conversation. I hope you have found this to be helpful. I hope that you have found it to contribute to your knowledge, and that you will use this and take this and start applying it in your workplace now. So, until then, be on the lookout for the email in your inbox, and I will talk to you then. Thanks so much.